when everyone in the neighborhood got wedding invitations. Except me, I knew something was terribly wrong. Every morning, I'd walk down the driveway, robe tied tight around my waist, coffee in hand, heart holding on to a foolish kind of hope. The mailbox was old and dented, the same one that once overflowed with birthday cards, school newsletters, and Christmas photos from family friends. Now it held only bills, catalogs, and disappointment. I'd flip through the envelopes slowly, fingertips trembling, as if the one I longed for might appear if I just looked hard enough. But day after day, there was nothing. No soft cream envelope with golden script. No invitation with my daughter's name printed in elegant letters. Lauren, my only child, neighbors, spoke about her wedding as if it were the event of the season. I overheard them at the grocery store, comparing floral arrangements and venues, their excitement bubbling over. Lauren Mitchell's wedding will be beautiful, one said, clutching her cart like it held treasure. Did you see her invitation? Gold-foiled edges. I smiled politely, even laughed when someone asked me what I planned to wear. I said I hadn't decided yet, as if I had a choice, as if there were a place for me to wear anything at all. Each night, I sat by the window, the house too quiet, the clock ticking far too loud. My daughter was getting married, and I, her mother, was learning about it secondhand from whispers and neighborhood chatter. At first, I told myself it was a mistake. Maybe the post office lost it. Maybe Lauren S. fiance's family was handling things. Maybe my name was somewhere, in a pile waiting to be mailed. But deep down, I knew better. The silence between us had stretched thin over the years, a thread pulled too tight. We'd argued when she moved in with her father and his new wife, Grace. I thought time would heal it, that one day she'd remember who stood by her through scraped knees and heartbreaks. But as the wedding drew closer and the mailbox stayed empty, denial began to crumble. I tried calling once. My voice shook when I left the message. Hi, sweetheart. Just checking in. I heard about the wedding. I'm so proud of you. I waited 3 days for a reply that never came. When the 4th day arrived, the mailman handed me a bundle of envelopes. One caught my eye. Ivory paper, perfect cursive. My pulse quickened, but it wasn't addressed to me. It was for my neighbor, Mrs. Ellis, somehow mixed in with mine. She smiled when she saw me holding it later that day. Isn't it lovely? Lauren's getting married. You must be so excited. I forced a smile so tight it hurt. Yes, I said softly. I'm thrilled. That night, I cried for the first time in years, quietly, so no one would hear. The kind of tears that don't fall fast. They just cling to your lashes, heavy and hot. I sat at the kitchen table, tracing the edge of an old photo. Lauren, in her prom dress, laughing as I pinned a loose curl back into place. What had I done to deserve being erased from the happiest day of her life? The pain was sharp, but the shame was sharper. I told no one. I didn't want pity, or gossip, or the look people give when they think a mother must have failed. I ironed the curtains, watered the garden, baked banana bread, ordinary things to fill an extraordinary emptiness. But every creak of the mailbox still pulled my eyes to the window. Every car that slowed near my house made my heart race. Hope is cruel that way. It makes you believe even when you know you shouldn't. By the end of that week, I accepted the truth. The invitation wasn't coming, not lost, not delayed, simply never sent. And though the world around me carried on, children laughing, lawnmowers humming, life pretending nothing had changed inside me, something quietly broke. Still, I smiled at the mailman the next morning, like nothing was wrong, because sometimes dignity is the only thing left when love walks away. And I couldn't help wondering who had made that decision, Lauren or someone else. I raised her with everything I had, and now I wasn't even worth a seat at her wedding. The words slipped from my mouth before I realized I'd spoken them. My friend Marianne looked at me from across the kitchen table, her coffee untouched. Her eyes carried the kind of pity I dreaded most, the kind that came with truth. Helen, she said softly, I think you need to know something. The air between us felt heavy. Outside, rain tapped gently against the windowpane. Inside, I braced myself. She hesitated before speaking. Grace's been handling all the wedding details, the guest list, the invitations, everything, and she made sure you weren't included. I stared at her, trying to make sense of the words. Grace Collins, my ex-husband's new wife, the woman who'd entered our lives like a shadow after the divorce. She told people it would be complicated, Marianne continued, her voice breaking, that it might make Lauren uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. That word cut deeper than any insult could. I tried to smile, but my lips wouldn't move. My hands were trembling slightly, so I gripped my coffee cup to steady them. The steam fogged my glasses. I took a slow breath. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. Marianne reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back before she could touch it. Sympathy, even from a friend, felt unbearable when she left. I sat there long after the sound of her car faded down the street. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking clock. I could almost hear my heart matching its rhythm. I didn't blame Lauren entirely, not yet. Grace had always been subtle, kind smiles with sharp edges. She'd rewritten small pieces of my past until even Lauren questioned my memories. A photo removed here, a story retold there. Over time, my place in my daughter's life had shrunk, replaced by polished lies and perfect manners. But even knowing that, the ache didn't ease, because deep down, I wanted to believe Lauren still remembered me. The way I tucked her in when she was sick, the way I stood in the rain during her soccer games, cheering until I lost my voice, the way she used to whisper, "You're my favorite person, Mom," before falling asleep. Now, I was nothing more than a name left off a list. My phone sat in front of me, black screen reflecting my tired eyes. It was her birthday next week. I wondered if she remembered that, too. I typed out a message, "I love you, and I'm thinking of you," then deleted it, typed it again, deleted it once more. It wasn't that I didn't want to reach out, I just didn't know if anyone was listening on the other end anymore. The rain outside grew heavier. I turned off the lights and sat in the dim glow of the kitchen lamp, my coffee cold, my heart colder. Somewhere in that silence, I made a quiet promise to myself. I wouldn't beg to belong, but I would find out the truth, not for revenge, but for peace. And as the thunder rolled in the distance, I couldn't shake one haunting question. If Grace had erased me from the wedding, what else had she erased from my daughter's heart? Looking back, it wasn't one big fight, it was 1,000 tiny goodbyes I didn't notice. It was Thanksgiving, 3 years ago, the last time we were all under the same roof before everything started to unravel. The house smelled like roasted turkey and cinnamon candles. I'd spent all morning basting, chopping, setting the table just the way Lauren liked. White linens, orange napkins folded like autumn leaves. When she walked in, she looked older somehow, more composed. And right behind her was Grace. At the time, she was just Dad's friend, though her presence already felt too familiar. She carried a bouquet of sunflowers, smiling wide as if she belonged there. "Helen," she said warmly, "you have such a lovely home." Her voice was soft, practiced, the kind people use when they want to sound kind, but their eyes tell another story. I thanked her, though the compliment landed wrong. The air between us was polite, too polite. At the dinner table, I tried to focus on Lauren. She was telling a story about her new job, her hands moving animated. I laughed at every detail, proud just to be near her. But every time I spoke, Grace found a way to gently redirect the conversation. "That's wonderful, Lauren," she said, resting her hand over mine. "You must have learned your work ethic from your father. He always said you had his determination." It was subtle, but Lauren smiled, nodded, didn't correct her. All evening, it went on that way. Little cuts dressed as kindness. "Oh, you make your own cranberry sauce. How brave of you. Most people don't risk it turning to tart. I love that you still keep everything so traditional. It's charming." Each remark felt like a thread pulled loose. I wanted to say something, but the room was filled with laughter, and I didn't want to be the one to darken it. Later, when I brought out dessert, I noticed Grace sitting close to Lauren, showing her something on her phone. They both laughed quietly. When I asked what was funny, Grace smiled and said, "Just an inside joke. You wouldn't get it." The words stung more than they should have. I carried the pie to the table and tried to steady my hands. After dinner, I watched from the kitchen window as they stood outside with my ex-husband, their breath fogging in the cold air. Grace's arm brushed Lauren's shoulder as naturally as if she'd done it for years. Something inside me shifted then, a quiet realization I didn't want to admit. Grace wasn't just visiting our family, she was replacing me in it. That night, when everyone left, I sat alone at the table surrounded by half-empty glasses and candle wax. I replayed every moment, every glance, every interruption, every time Lauren looked to Grace instead of me. It hadn't been one betrayal, not a single cruel word or argument I could point to. It was smaller, softer, and far more dangerous. A slow erasing. I remember washing the dishes long after midnight, the water running warm over my hands, and whispering to myself, "Don't make it a big deal. She'll come around." but somewhere between the sound of the faucet and the echo of my own voice, I knew that was the last Thanksgiving I'd ever spend with my daughter as her mother. And now, years later, the silence between us felt louder than all those tiny goodbyes combined. When your child asks you not to come, you don't fight, you just break quietly. I don't remember how many times I rehearsed that call before I finally pressed dial. It was a Tuesday afternoon. The sky outside was pale and empty, like it knew something was about to be taken from me. I'd set my teacup beside the phone, my hand hovering just above the receiver. I told myself to sound calm, kind, not desperate. Mothers aren't supposed to beg. When Lauren answered, her voice was polite, distant, in a way that didn't sound like her. "Hi, Mom, I was just about to call you," she said, but we both knew that wasn't true. I smiled into the silence, pretending she could hear it. "I just wanted to ask if you got my message. I wasn't sure if there was a mix-up with the invitation." There was a pause, the kind that stretches out and makes you wish you hadn't spoken at all. "Oh," she said finally, "about that." I held my breath. "Mom, maybe it's better if you don't come. It'll just complicate things." Her words fell so softly, so carefully, it took a moment for their weight to settle. I laughed, not out of humor, but to stop myself from crying. "Complicate things," I repeated. "Sweetheart," she cut in gently. "It's not personal, Mom. Grace has everything planned, and, well, it's just easier this way. Easier." I wondered if she knew what that word did to me. I wanted to scream, to tell her that I was her mother, that I'd carried her, raised her, loved her more than anyone ever could, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I said, "I understand, because that's what mothers do. We protect our children even from the truth that they're hurting us. Thank you for being honest," I added, the words tasting bitter. She sighed with relief, as if I'd just removed a burden from her shoulders. "I knew you'd understand," she said softly. "You've always been so strong." When the call ended, the room felt hollow. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, every sound seemed cruelly loud. I sat there, phone still in my hand, until the dial tone faded into silence. Then I reached for my tea. It had gone cold, untouched. I lifted it anyway, holding it near my lips, but the tremor in my hand spilled some onto the table. The small puddle spread slowly, reflecting the dim light of the kitchen lamp, like a quiet kind of grief that didn't need words. My reflection in that tea looked older, smaller, unfamiliar. I wondered when I'd stopped being Mom and started being a complication. The tears came in waves, silent and unstoppable. I pressed a napkin to my mouth to keep from making a sound, afraid the house might echo my heartbreak back to me. Somewhere, in another part of town, my daughter was probably laughing about cake flavors and floral arrangements. I wanted to be happy for her, I truly did. But happiness and heartbreak don't coexist easily, one always drowns the other. That night, I went to bed early, though I didn't sleep. I just lay there, listening to the soft rustle of the wind against the window, thinking about the child I raised and the woman who no longer saw me in her future. And in that darkness, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't disappear quietly, because somewhere beneath that pain, a small spark still whispered, "This story isn't over yet. Sometimes, strangers fight for you when family won't." It was a quiet Thursday morning, just a week before the wedding. I told myself I was only going out for groceries. But I ended up walking through the little downtown district instead, the one lined with boutiques, flower shops, and bakeries that smelled like childhood. I wanted to feel normal, I suppose, to pretend that my world wasn't quietly collapsing. I stopped outside a bridal shop, drawn by a mannequin in the window wearing a lace gown so delicate it seemed to glow. I stared longer than I meant to, imagining how Lauren might look walking down the aisle. I smiled through the ache in my chest. That's when I heard a voice behind me, double quotes, "Mrs. Mitchell." I turned, startled. A tall man with kind eyes and an easy smile stood there, holding a bag from the same shop. "Sorry," he said quickly. "You probably don't remember me. I'm Jason Miller, Ryan's best man. Lauren's fiancé, right?" I blinked, trying to place him. "Oh yes, Jason, of course." I forced a small smile. "It's been a long time." He grinned. "I've seen your photos on Lauren's phone, in their apartment. She talks about you a lot." For a second I almost believed him. My throat tightened. "She does?" His smile faltered, just slightly. "Well, she used to." The air shifted. He noticed the way my hands fidgeted with my purse strap, the hesitation in my smile. "You must be excited," he said gently. "Big weekend coming up." I hesitated, a second too long. Jason's brows furrowed. Wait, don't tell me you're not. I shook my head before he could finish. It's complicated. He stared at me, disbelief flashing across his face. You mean you're not invited? I couldn't meet his eyes. It's best this way, I murmured. Sometimes parents aren't meant to be part of everything. He looked at me for a long time, then set his shopping bag down on the bench beside us. No, he said firmly. That's not right. I tried to laugh it off. Jason, please, you don't understand, he interrupted, his tone gentle but unwavering. I understand enough. You're her mother. You raised her, and I've seen the way she talks about you when she thinks no one's listening. His words landed like light in a dark room. She talks about me. He nodded. Yeah. She told Ryan once that you were the strongest person she knew. Said you used to make her believe everything could be fixed with tea and a good talk. I swallowed hard. That was a long time ago. Maybe, he said softly. But people don't stop meaning what they said just because someone else told them to forget. We stood there in silence for a moment, the city moving around us, people passing, laughter spilling from a nearby cafe. I suddenly felt the weight of all the years I'd spent waiting for someone, anyone, to see me. Jason bent to pick up his bag. Mrs. Mitchell, I can't stand by and let this happen. You deserve to see your daughter get married. I shook my head. Jason, please don't get involved. It'll just make things worse. He smiled, but there was something resolute in his eyes. Sometimes, worse is worth it, if it means doing what's right. Before I could respond, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded slip of paper. If you change your mind, be at this address next Saturday morning. I unfolded it slowly. It was the address of the church. I'll make sure you get to see her, he said quietly, even if no one else wants you there. And then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd before I could thank him. I stood there holding that paper like it was a lifeline, a piece of hope I hadn't dared to hold in months. For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, not despair, just a small, steady flicker of faith that maybe the truth had a way of finding its way back. Even when people tried to bury it, she didn't just want me gone from the wedding, she wanted me erased from my daughter's life. If betrayal had a voice, it would sound like Grace's laughter, soft, controlled, and echoing just enough to make you question whether you'd imagined it. While I was trying to hold myself together, she was busy rewriting my story. I didn't know it then, but Grace had been preparing this for years. She'd whispered carefully chosen words to anyone who would listen about how I was emotionally fragile, how the divorce had really affected me, how Lauren needed space from her mother's instability. Every sentence stressed as concern, every lie delivered with a sympathetic sigh. By the time the wedding planning began, those lies had grown roots. To Lauren's new in-laws, I was the unpredictable ex-wife. To the wedding coordinator, I was a risk for unwanted drama. To Grace's circle, I was the woman who couldn't let go. But Grace's resentment didn't start with Lauren. It started long before, years ago, before my marriage ended. Grace had been a family acquaintance, a co-worker of my husband's. She'd show up at company picnics, all charm and bright smiles, offering help where it wasn't needed. I remember once, she brought me coffee at a PTA fundraiser and said, "You're so lucky to have someone like Tom. Men like him don't stay single long." I hadn't understood it then, but now, I see it clearly. Every compliment was a seed she was planting. After the divorce, she stepped in under the guise of comfort. She visited Lauren, offered guidance, told her I was grieving in unhealthy ways, that I was lost, that I needed time alone. And when she married my ex-husband years later, everything fit perfectly into her plan. She had what she wanted: proximity, control, and the power to decide who belonged. To her, I wasn't just competition. I was a living reminder of everything she could never be, the woman Tom once chose instead of her. I imagine it must have eaten at her, watching the daughter of the man she envied still carry his love. So she did what people like Grace always do. She rewrote the narrative. She turned me into a villain, and herself into a savior. I found out later that she told Lauren I'd refused to contribute to the wedding, that I'd called her ungrateful and selfish. Lies so absurd I almost laughed, except nothing about them was funny. I wondered if Lauren ever questioned them, even for a moment, if she ever looked at Grace and saw the cracks beneath her charm. But people believed the stories that hurt least, and Grace made sure hers sounded like love. It wasn't enough for her to keep me away. She needed me to forget. The realization hit one night when I was sorting through old photos to make myself feel closer to Lauren. In one album, where a picture of us at her high school graduation should have been, the space was empty. I remembered giving that album to Grace once, years ago, when she offered to digitize everything. That's when I understood she wasn't just trying to erase me from Lauren's wedding, she was rewriting the past to justify it. And as I stared at that missing photo, the truth became clear. Grace's game wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control. But she hadn't planned for one thing, for someone else to finally see through her. Jason's promise replayed in my mind, quiet but powerful. You deserve to see your daughter get married. For the first time, Grace wasn't the only one moving pieces on the board. And deep down, I could feel it. The tide was beginning to turn. They left an empty seat for me, but I wasn't done being her mother. The morning of the wedding was soft and golden. The kind of day that begged to be remembered. I watched the sunlight stretch across my kitchen counter as I sat with a cup of tea that had long gone cold. On the table beside me was the folded slip of paper Jason had given me, the church address written in his neat handwriting. I'd read it so many times the edges had begun to wear. My hands shook slightly as I traced the words. I wasn't sure if I should go. Part of me wanted to stay hidden, to avoid another wound I might not recover from, but another part, the mother in me, refused to let that chair at the wedding sit empty, as if I'd never existed. By noon, I was standing outside the small white church. Cars lined the street, ribbons fluttering from side mirrors, laughter spilling from open doors. I could hear the music starting inside. My heart raced like it was running toward something it had waited a lifetime to reach. Through the glass doors, I saw the rows of guests dressed in pastels and pearls. The front pew gleamed under the light of stained glass, and right there to the left of the aisle was an empty chair. My chair. Grace had made sure everyone noticed it. I saw her standing near the altar, poised and perfect, her pearls glinting beneath the chandelier. She leaned toward one of the guests, whispering something that made them glance at the vacant seat and shake their head in pity. Lauren stood at the back of the church, radiant in her wedding gown. She was breathtaking, her veil shimmering like mist. But when her eyes wandered toward the front, when she saw that seat, something flickered across her face. Guilt, uncertainty, a memory, maybe, of the mother who should have been sitting there. Grace noticed the hesitation. I watched her glide over to Lauren, hand resting gently on her arm. I couldn't hear her words, but I could read the shape of her lips. She decided not to come. Lauren nodded faintly, her eyes falling. She believed it. She believed Grace. The organ began to play softly. Guests turned in their seats, anticipation humming through the air. My breath caught. It was about to begin. I stood outside the door, my palms pressed together as if in prayer. The world inside moved forward without me, just as Grace intended. But something inside me refused to let that be the end. Because that empty seat wasn't a symbol of my absence. It was proof of what still lived in me, the part that would never stop showing up for my child. And as the doors began to close, I took one quiet step forward. When she saw who walked her down the aisle, every lie unraveled in an instant. The music swelled, that slow, graceful tune that carries brides toward new beginnings. The guests rose to their feet, heads turning toward the back doors as they opened. Lauren stood there, trembling slightly beneath her veil. Grace's chosen escort, her father, my ex-husband, Tom, who was also Grace's husband, stepped forward to take her arm, but before he could reach her, someone else appeared from the side aisle, Jason. He walked toward her calmly, his expression steady but his jaw set with quiet defiance. The guests murmured, confusion rippling through the crowd like wind across water. Grace's smile froze mid-expression. Jason stopped in front of Lauren and spoke softly enough that only she could hear. She hesitated, looking toward Grace, then back to him. "Trust me," he whispered, and before anyone could object, he offered her his arm. Slowly, hesitantly, Lauren took it. The organist paused, unsure whether to continue, but Jason gave a small nod, and the music began again. They walked together down the aisle, a pair that didn't fit the picture Grace had painted, yet somehow felt right. The tension in the room was thick, every eye watching, waiting. Tom stood frozen in the corner, his confusion painted clear. Halfway down the aisle, Jason stopped. He turned his head toward the entrance doors, and that's when it happened. The heavy wooden doors opened again, and a hush swept through the church. There I was, standing in the doorway. I hadn't planned on walking in. I'd meant to stand quietly in the back, unseen. But when I saw my daughter, my little girl, trembling and white. I couldn't stay hidden any longer. For a moment, no one moved. Then Lauren's bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. She turned, her veil trembling, her eyes wide. "Mom," my voice broke before I could answer. "I'm here, sweetheart." Tears spilled down her cheeks. The audience gasped. Grace's composure shattered like glass. She took a step forward, whispering furiously to Tom. But Lauren wasn't listening anymore. She let go of Jason's arm and ran right down the aisle, her dress brushing the edges of the pews, her sobs echoing in the vaulted space. When she reached me, she fell into my arms with the same sound she used to make as a little girl after a nightmare, that desperate, shaking kind of cry that says "I'm sorry" without words. I held her as tightly as I could. "It's all right," I whispered into her hair. "You're safe. I'm here." The church was silent, except for her weeping. Jason stood quietly nearby, his eyes soft, his role fulfilled. The guests exchanged uncertain looks, but no one spoke. The only sound was the distant hum of the organ, still playing faintly, a song that suddenly meant something entirely different. When Lauren finally pulled back, her face was wet with tears. "They told me you didn't want to come," she said, her voice breaking. "I wanted nothing more," I said, "but someone wanted you to think otherwise." Her eyes darted toward Grace, who stood stiff and pale near the front pew. For the first time, Lauren looked at her not with trust, but with realization. In that instant, every lie Grace had built began to crumble. Her lies finally walked out the door, right along with her. Grace recovered quickly, her face smoothing into practiced calm. "This is outrageous," she said, stepping forward. "She wasn't invited. She's making a scene." The guests stirred, whispering. The officiant looked uncertain, clutching his notes. But before I could respond, Jason stepped forward, his voice ringing clear. "No, Grace. The only scene here is the one you created." Her eyes narrowed. "Excuse me." He faced the crowd, unshaken. "I spoke with Mrs. Mitchell last week. She didn't refuse the invitation. She never got one." Grace made sure of that. A murmur rippled through the room. Jason continued, his words sharp and sure. "And I also found out why. I've known Ryan and Lauren for years, and things never added up. Grace's stories about Helen's instability, lies. Every single one. I talked to Ryan myself. He had no idea." Grace intercepted messages, changed details, told people Helen was unwell. All eyes turned to Grace. The color drained from her face. Ryan rose from his seat near the altar, disbelief etched into every line of his face. "Is that true?" Grace stammered, her voice faltering for the first time. "I was just protecting Lauren." "I thought." "No," Lauren said quietly. She stepped forward, her hands trembling. "You thought you could control me. You made me believe my own mother didn't care." Grace's mouth opened, but no words came out. The officiant took a cautious step back. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the candles seemed to flicker in judgment. "I trusted you," Lauren whispered, her voice cracking. "You made me doubt the one person who's loved me unconditionally." Grace looked around, searching for support, but found none. Faces that once smiled at her now turned away. Jason crossed his arms. "It's over, Grace." Tom finally stood, his expression unreadable. "I think you should leave." For the first time since I'd known her, Grace looked small, powerless. She clutched her purse, her voice shaking. "You're making a mistake," she said faintly. But no one answered. She turned toward the doors, heels echoing against the marble floor. Each step sounded like the breaking of something long overdue. When the doors closed behind her, the silence left behind felt pure, like fresh air after a storm. Lauren turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I brushed a strand of hair from her cheek. "You have nothing to be sorry for, sweetheart. You just needed to see the truth." Ryan approached then, his eyes kind. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said softly, "would you stay? We'd like to start again properly this time." I nodded, unable to speak. As the guests resettled, Jason gave me a quiet nod from across the aisle. I smiled, a silent thank you passing between us. The ceremony began again, but now, it was different. The air was lighter. The words spoken carried real love, not control or pretense. When Lauren and Ryan exchanged vows, she kept glancing at me, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. And when the music arose and applause filled the church, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory, not revenge, peace. Grace's lies had finally walked out the door, and in their place, truth had come home. The reception hall shimmered with soft, golden light. Candles flickered in crystal holders, music drifted through the air, and laughter, real, unforced laughter, filled every corner. For the first time that day, the world felt still enough for Helen to breathe. She sat quietly at a round table near the dance floor, a slice of untouched cake before her. Guests moved in easy circles, their joy contagious. Across the room, Lauren was surrounded by friends, her wedding dress flowing like a memory brought to life. When her eyes met her mother's, everything else seemed to fade. Lauren walked toward her, bouquet now resting on the table, her eyes red but smiling. "Mom," she said softly, "they're about to start the first dance. But would you?" Helen blinked, unsure she'd heard right. "Me." Lauren nodded, holding out her hand. "Please." For a second, Helen hesitated. Decades of motherhood, heartbreak, forgiveness, and love flashing all at once. Then she stood, smoothing her dress, and took her daughter's hand. The crowd quieted, even the music seemed to hold its breath. The song began, an old tune, gentle and slow. They moved together, hesitant at first, then steady. Helen didn't think about the people watching, or Grace's absence, or the years that had hurt. She just thought of the little girl whose feet once stood on hers while they danced in the living room. Lauren rested her head on Helen's shoulder. "I'm sorry I believed her," she whispered. Helen smiled faintly, her voice soft. "You don't need to apologize. You just needed time to see." Tears welled in Lauren's eyes. "I don't deserve you." Helen brushed a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "You'll always be my girl. That's not something anyone could take away." Around them, guests dabbed their eyes, cameras clicked quietly, but Helen didn't notice. She wasn't dancing to be seen, she was dancing to heal. The music swelled, and when it ended, the applause wasn't for a performance. It was for forgiveness, raw, real, and radiant. For the first time in years, Helen felt whole. The next morning, sunlight streamed through Helen's kitchen window, the same window that had witnessed countless mornings of waiting, worrying, and remembering. But today felt different. The house no longer felt empty. On the table sat a framed photo. Lauren, in her wedding gown, laughing beside her mother. The two of them mid-dance. Someone had taken it without Helen noticing. A perfect moment caught between tears and joy. Helen traced the edge of the frame with her fingertip. She didn't keep it as proof of what she'd endured, but as a reminder of what she'd reclaimed. Love, fragile, tested, but unbroken. She poured herself a cup of tea, the ritual unchanged, but her heart lighter. Outside, the roses she'd tended for years glowed in the morning sun. She thought about how often she'd nearly stopped caring for them, how some seasons had nearly taken them, yet every spring, they bloomed again. That's what love was, she realized. It didn't vanish when betrayed. It simply waited quietly, patiently, for the truth to catch up. Lauren called later that morning. Her voice was warm, familiar. "Mom," she said, "we're heading for the airport, but I wanted to thank you." "For what?" Helen asked, smiling. "For not giving up on me, even when I gave up on us." Helen felt her throat tighten. A mother doesn't stop loving, she just waits at the door until her child comes home. Lauren went quiet for a moment, emotion trembling in her voice. "I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. Always." When the call ended, Helen sat for a long moment in silence. The house was peaceful, not lonely, the kind of quiet that feels full. She turned back to the framed photo and smiled. The story wasn't one of pain anymore, it was one of redemption. Outside, the wind moved gently through the roses, scattering petals across the garden path. Helen whispered to herself, almost as if she were closing a book. Sometimes, love has to stand at the door before it's welcomed back in. And for once, the door was wide open. If your child's silence ever broke your heart, you're not alone. I know that kind of quiet. It seeps into your mornings, follows you through your days, and lingers in the corners of your house when the lights go out. It's the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a room, it fills your chest. I spent years believing I had somehow failed, that if I had been softer, stronger, quieter, louder, something she might have stayed close. But the truth is, love isn't a performance, it's a steady presence. Sometimes, people just forget how to see it. When Lauren pushed me away, I thought it was the end of everything. I tried to fill the space she left behind with chores, books, and distractions, anything to stop thinking about the missing calls and unanswered messages. But love doesn't disappear just because it's unreturned. It waits, quietly, patiently. I learned that dignity isn't found in begging to be seen. It's found in standing tall, even when no one's looking. It's in showing up for love, even when love doesn't show up for you. If you're watching this and your child hasn't called in weeks, or months, or even years, don't give up. You're not forgotten, even if it feels that way. Sometimes, they have to wander through their own noise before they can hear your voice again. And when they do, when the day comes that they remember who held them through every storm, your love will still be there, waiting like the porch light you never turned off. We all age differently, but one truth remains: time tests every bond, especially the ones that matter most. And yet, love doesn't wrinkle, it doesn't fade, it endures. If you've lost faith, hold on just a little longer. Sometimes, redemption arrives when you least expect it, in a phone call, a knock at the door, or a look across a crowded room that says, "I see you now." You've given so much, carried so much, and loved beyond reason. That's not weakness, that's strength, the kind only mothers know. And if your heart still aches tonight, remember this: you are still worthy of love, even if the world forgets to remind you. Because the love you gave, the real, steady kind, always finds its way home. If you've stayed with me this far, thank you, truly. Sharing this story wasn't easy, but maybe that's what healing sounds like: a quiet truth, spoken out loud, hoping it reaches someone who needs it. Maybe you've lived your own version of this story. Maybe your daughter stopped calling, or your son forgot to visit, or someone you love just drifted away. I want you to know, your story matters too. Every ache, every unanswered message, every quiet tear you've wiped away, it all matters. We don't talk enough about the courage it takes to keep loving in silence, to keep hoping when it feels foolish. But you did. You kept the light on, you waited, you believed in the power of love to come back changed, and that makes you part of something bigger than heartbreak. If you have the strength, I'd like to hear your story. Write it in the comments, even if it's just a few words. Tell me who you'd walk back into love for. Tell me what forgiveness looked like for you, or tell me what you're still waiting for. Because when we share these pieces of ourselves, we remind each other that we're not alone, that the ache of motherhood, the beauty of forgiveness, the long road back to connection, it's something we walk together. I read every message I can, and every time I see a story like yours, I think, there's another mother holding on. And that gives me hope all over again. Before this story ends, I want to leave you with this: don't measure love by how loudly it's returned. Measure it by how gently you keep giving it. We all deserve to be walked back into love, not out of pity, not out of guilt, but because love, when it's real, always finds its way back to truth. So, take a deep breath tonight. If your phone doesn't ring, if your table has one empty chair, or if your memories hurt more than they heal, know this: you are still part of the story. Some chapters end quietly, but that doesn't mean they're over. Sometimes, love is already on its way home. Thank you for listening. Thank you for feeling this with me. And remember, your story matters too. We all deserve to be walked back into love.